Welcome to Audience of One podcast. We hope the stories and testimonies shared by a range of Christian leaders inspire and encourage you to live for an audience of one in every season of life. And if you do not yet have a relationship with God, we hope that these conversations offer meaningful insight into the lives of those who follow Christ. This is Audience of One.
On this episode, we hear from Stephen McAlpine. He's a renowned author, blogger, pastor, and ministry consultant. He has 3 decades of experience in pastoring and planning churches, and he's also well known for the author of multiple books, including Being the Bad Guys, How to Live for Jesus in a World That Says You Shouldn't, and also Future Proof, How to Live for Jesus in a Culture That Keeps on Changing. So Stephen, thanks for joining us on the podcast. So you're a bit of a big name, especially around the Q Baptist Church. But no, definitely appreciate you joining us, and yeah, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks. Great to be with you, Regan and Mark. A bit of a name, a bit of a face, they say in London. You've got a bit of a face. So I get that, but Mark and I go back a long way.
We go back a long way, so this is a safe place, Stephen. So we'll just keep the stories safe. But it is really good to see you, mate, and joining us from a bit of ministry over there in New Zealand as well. So glad of your generosity and your time. We really appreciate it, mate.
Not a worry.
So we gave a bit of an introduction to everyone at the start of the podcast, but can you just tell us a bit about yourself? So where are you from and growing up, and what your experience was like growing up early years?
Yeah, early years was a bit of a shift from Northern Ireland to Perth in 1973. And we were one of those 10-pound poms. You might see that Netflix series, 10-pound pom. And my family were, 4 of us. So 40 quid it cost us. I think the British government thought it was a steal, and got us to Perth. And if you came to Perth in 1973, it was like landing on the moon. You couldn't afford to go back. Perth was pretty small, and it was just sand. It felt like we were going from, the Emerald Isle of Ireland to this sort of half-baked space kind of place with very, very sandy. So that was a big shift. But parents left because of the Northern Irish Troubles in Northern Ireland. And so big shift to come over to Australia. We went back for a couple of years in the 80s, but it didn't take long for us to realise that wasn't our future. And we went back to Australia. And imagine going back to Belfast after living near Fremantle for 7 or 8 years as a kid growing up. It was like a nightmare. It was like, what is this place?
Yeah. How old were you when you guys moved over, and what were your memories about the Troubles?
Yeah, first time around, not much. Moved when we were 6 or 7. I went back in my teens, so I did 3 years of high school in Northern Ireland in a town during the height of the Troubles, which was a very troubled town. And there were bombings every week. You just switch on the news and you just hear a young police officer has been shot dead, in his car, making out with his girlfriend. Someone taps on the window, shoots him in the head, those sorts of things. It's like, whoa, what is this place? So they were the town we lived in had a massive bomb in it that blew the whole centre of the town apart. People get not used to it, but there's a low grade a weariness to it that wore people down. And I think and church felt a little bit heavy as well. It's very Protestant Catholic kind of community. And within the Protestant community, there's sort of slices of, quite extreme perspectives on the Troubles through to don't talk to me about it and everything in between. So it was a weird couple of years, and we sort of scarpered back to Perth after that.
So growing up, your family went to church and you were in a Christian household, and I guess was it hard for your family to go to church early days when you were in Northern Ireland, or what was your experience around that?
Going to church in Northern Ireland was what we were used to, and my parents went to a church run by a guy who ended up being the chief minister of Northern Ireland, Ian Paisley, quite a political firebrand. And then they came to Australia because of that. So church wasn't so hard there. The big leap was coming to Australia, and my mum realising, you don't have to wear a hat You know what I mean? It was a very much more chill experience in church. And my parents struggled with not the theological change, the cultural change of moving from Northern Ireland to Perth, where, it was shorts and thongs in church. And my mum struggled to get her head around that. But I think our church experiences in Australia were just very different, just culturally as much as theologically. I think theologically more aligned, but culturally very different.
Mm.
So if we're going to skip forward,
Yeah.
like a fair way, you find yourself. What did you do straight out of high school? Actually, I'm interested in that. I don't even know if I know that.
Do you know my dad left my mum a week before I started university,
Right,
blew our family out of the water.
right,
These were shaping moments for me because I remember the first Sunday, and I won't name the church, I went to church after my parents split up, and we walked in feeling, I said, what is that strange? Oh, that's shame. Why
right,
should we feel shame?
right.
So it was really hard. And then I did a postmodern arts degree. So I shouldn't even be a Christian except for the grace of God, because I was going down the whole sort of the postmodern framework and all that sort of stuff. And getting in with a bunch of people, sort of was Christian, sort of not. Discovered Gothic music, which suited my sensibilities at the time. And I have a twin brother, an identical twin brother. And so I found it really hard over the next 5 or 6 years to figure out what to do. So I did an arts degree. I worked a bit at a Christian radio station. But my twin brother by this stage was doing his PhD at Oxford, and he's a senior academic. So I felt like I'd lost track a little bit. I think one of the saving graces for me was I changed churches, as you would. Ended up going to an AOG church for a few years, which kind of was the flip side of what I was going to. But it actually, I'll say it carefully, it gave me some experiences that opened my eyes to a few things, right? That I feel like, oh, there's another side to Christianity that I had no clue about. And it was also a church where people's lives were pretty messy, and that was okay. And that kind of made us, who had, been the model family, suddenly broken apart, feel like maybe we can keep this Christian thing going. That's what it did for me.
Did your mum go with you at that point? So it was a family decision. Your
Yeah.
mum took you along in a sense.
Yeah, Mum went to another Pentecostal church in Fremantle near this one. So we both had these shared experiences. And I know I'm talking to Baptists, but I know there's Baptists and there's Baptists, but it was a very spiritual experience, not driven, but major spiritual experiences that I still to this day, 40 years later, go, what was that? How did that happen? And not negatively, just wow. I had no experience of major out there kind of charismatic Pentecostal things, none. So I didn't drum it up, but they happened. And it happened for my mum as well, that God had a moment in our lives, I think, where he did something deep at a level that ordinary stuff wasn't really going to do, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. And just, it's so interesting because there's two things there. There's the acceptance of you as you are with everything that happened with your dad, which you didn't necessarily find that acceptance at the previous place. But then there's that sense of going from a conservative church to the one that you're in, So there's quite a change there, but you still were embracing Christ.
Yes, yeah. And I still remember the thing that struck me most when I went to the AOG church was the songs.
Right.
We sang songs that felt deep. I'd never heard them, choruses, we were a hymn church. And we sang stuff that I was exalt the Lord our God and worship at his footstool, old sort of early 80s song. And it was just, it had even going into church felt thick, as in like it felt like a thick experience of something. It was a really interesting time.
So I know you mentioned that you didn't have like these, I guess, like experiences till later on, sort of your uni years. Was that when you gave your life to Christ, or was that before that time? And do you have like a specific memory of when you did?
Yeah, look, it was much younger than that. I speak at a lot of schools, and I get at posh schools in Sydney about apologetics and Christianity. But the main question I get asked is, when did you become a Christian? And I say, at the age of 8, after a lifetime of drugs and prison, right? And then I say, the more compelling question is, why am I a Christian? I remember at age of 8, it was a very decisionism kind of come to the front kind of thing. But 17 was another critical point when parents split up. The 3 years of uni was hard, but it was that there were signposts along the way. And then a little later, it was someone's teaching on Romans that just went, whoa, I'd never figured that out. I should have figured that out, but here we are, right? Romans 5, 6, 7, and 8 were like mind-blowing, listening to them on cassette, I think, on a bus journey down to Esperance to visit friends. And I had these cassettes listening to Romans. And so you get the initial thing, then you get the experience thing, and then you sort of ground that in, oh, wow, that's what the gospel means. And that's probably the bulk of the journey. And suddenly that brings you up to what seems like no time ago, but it is 25, right? Or 24, 25. And it's like, wow, that's a long time ago. But those 7 years from 17 to 24 were very compressed, tight years in my life, I think. They are for most people. People who become Christian and then do those 7 years in good community, it really shapes them for a long time, if for good or ill, I think.
We probably first connected on a conversational level at a particular pub in a particular suburb, but probably you really got on the radar with your blog, really.
Yeah.
And that's where you started writing a lot of your thoughts. What was compelling you to do that? And and it's obviously had quite the journey, but the genesis of it and the origin of it.
Yeah. Well, I did creative writing at uni, so I always wanted to be involved in writing. And I wrote a bit of a blog when we went and did some church planting in the UK, but it didn't really take off. And I remember the day that my blog took off. A shaft of light appeared, an angel. No, that's not. I was fudging not finishing a sermon on Exodus on a Thursday morning, and I thought, where this culture is going is really interesting. And I haven't read much that tells me how to navigate it. Lots of people are telling me that don't worry about it. And other people are saying, oh, all ideas are up for grabs and Christianity is just one of them and it can find its place in the public square. And I went, it doesn't feel like that. It feels more hostile. And I wrote this blog post and suddenly 70,000 people read it. And it was like, whoa, about exile, living in Babylon and what it means culturally.
I remember that.
Yeah. And it was like, and it just blew up. And from that point on, I started to get requests to do things. Lots of speaking engagements, but at this stage I was planning a church as well because at heart I'm a pastor, and I still, even though I don't do it, I miss it. And my wife and I, we were the couple that you're there first, you leave last, you work the room, the curtains to pray and talk with everyone, and then leave. And I still miss that week in week out thing. But what I wanted to do with my writing was to have a ministry to the church, as well as I had a ministry in a local setting to a church. And they're hard to hold in tension given how many hours you have in a week, I think.
After your first blog sort of blew up, as you said, Stephen, was it hard to find humility during that time? And I guess as your name got a bit bigger and your blogs and writing became a bit more popular, was it hard to give that credit to God at times?
Yeah, it was hard to have humility since I won the trophy for the highest score in the MVP in the Baptist basketball competition. I struggled with kids, right? So, what it wasn't so much. Here's the interesting thing, and here's the pride thing. The fear was, is it good enough to write a 70,000 person read blog, and then just disappear again? You've got to be very careful of the. I'm an influencer. I've got to keep this going. I've got to find the next thing. And if you start to live in that echo chamber, you'll start to look around and say, what do people want me to say? And I think that's always a challenge for public figures and pastors in many senses, because pastors are public, to figure out how to do that, how to dial down I've got to do the next thing. It's got to be more important than the last thing. And that's why, if you do read the more reflective pastoral writers like Eugene Peterson, they do give you that, take a look at yourself, son. God has saved you by his grace. He doesn't owe you another 70,000 person read blog post. Just remember that. Didn't know you won. And more what's happened in my writing is that the older I get, the more I just wish I had a beach shack down the south of Perth where I just sat and wrote and no one bothered me about anything. That isn't going to happen.
Talking about awards and most valuable awards, I mean, being the bad guy, the book, correct me if I'm wrong, but it won highest selling Christian book in Australia.
Yeah, won the 2021 Australian Christian Book of the Year, and I sold a truckload of them, to be honest.
Yeah.
And my second book didn't do as well because the first book was a zeitgeist moment. It picked up. This is probably where my writing has worked well, when I can take something that people can't quite articulate and articulate it for them in simpler ways and break it down. I think that's my superpower in writing, is like, hey, it's probably like this. And people go, oh, yeah, I thought that, but I couldn't articulate it. And that's, yeah, God's gifted me to do that. And I want to keep doing that. And I think I love watching where the culture is going, and I'm being slightly ahead of the curve. And I want to be able to write so that Christians are encouraged that they can keep living for Jesus, whether the world is for them or against them. Preach the gospel.
So for the 2 or 3 Christians who haven't read it in Australia,
yeah.
Can you give us, like, we were taught, like, the big idea? What's the big idea of that book?
The big idea of being the bad guys is that very quickly the culture shifted against the Christian framework as being either positive in the society for everyone, to a neutral, to you might be part of the problem and you're oppressing people with your ideas and you need to get on board with the cultural framework. And Christians were discombobulated by that, and I wanted to show why it happened and what to do about it, and why the gospel and the scriptures can give you the framework for how to do that.
And just before Regan jumps in, because the bit I loved most about that book was, I think it's towards the end, where you basically give a whimsical application, really, of what you think the antidote is. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, is that happy, sort of the joyful happy warriors or whatever it is?
Well, the neighbours, you talked about loving your neighbours, basically. Yeah. How do we remedy this situation? We posture ourselves as good neighbours, right?
Yeah, because you don't. Yeah, even, we just had an election in Australia and you see the anger come up again and you see that and I go, oh, that's not going to win anything. And I think in my second book, I laid it out a little bit thicker because people said, yeah, that's great. You filled me with joy and I can go forward. What does it look like? What do I need to do? And I spoke to a couple of people said to me after they'd read my blog a lot, I was really surprised at how joyous being the bad guys was. Right, what does that say about my Eeyore personality? But it was joyous because once you steep it in the Bible and you go, hey, nothing's really changed. And St. Peter was, calling people to live joyfully in the light of the gospel and you've been saved. And even if you suffer for a little while, and all we want to do, like an 8-year-old in the back seat of the car when we haven't got to where we get to, is how long is it going to be? That's a little while. And I think that's encouraging.
Yeah, absolutely. And you did just mention the politics side of it, Stephen, and I know it's pretty relevant because we were recording this just after the elections just happened. But how has politics played into making Christians seem like the bad guys? And can you, I guess, elaborate on that a bit more?
Yeah. There's a couple of things with politics and Christianity. I think very liberal Christianity won the politics and lost the church because it's emptied out. And it aligned itself with kind of a progressive narrative politically, and it spends a lot of time in that area. And there's some things on there we need to learn from. The other side of the extreme is the anger that you see rising on the right. So you see the Christian nationalist stuff, that we can win this back. Now, they've got a post-millennial view of that. So it's another 5,000 years we can sort this out because Jesus isn't coming back for 5,000 years. And what you get is anger because there's a level of expectation and entitlement among Christians that the political center should include us in everything. And I think we've grappled and struggled to figure out how to live with a a secular state that did not know Joseph, that doesn't understand that the Christian framework has given it the Western liberal ideas legs. But I don't think you're going to get it back. And I even see Facebook and social media about what's just happened in the election. And I go, a lot of angry people out there saying, this was a Christian country once. And I go, was it though? Was it really? What do you mean by that? Unpack that for me. Was it a gospel-driven culture? I don't think so. Our Indigenous people wouldn't think so. Lots of people might not think so. And so it had Christian frameworks. The West has got a Christianized framework. There's a great book out by a gay Jewish man who's not a believer at all in anything really, called Cross Purposes in America. And he says that America cannot cope without Christianity because it's what Jesus was like, the idea of forgiveness, and the common phrase in the Bible, do not be afraid, are the underpinnings of liberal democracy. And other people other than Christians are seeing that, but I don't think we're going to get back a Christian nation, and I'd be very sus about what that would look like if we did.
Do you predict the culture in Australia to specifically get more or less hostile? It sounds like maybe a bit less more hostile even. And how should we deal with this? I know you said, mentioned a bit before about, I guess, like being even the nice guy sometimes, or just being nice to our neighbours. And I guess to follow up on that, is there people that you think of who are Christian leaders or even just general Christians who are good role models in living for Jesus in these times of cultural divide?
Great question. The Archbishop of Sydney, Kanishka, is a friend from Perth, and he's a very winsome, godly, ex-Buddhist Sri Lankan. And the very liberal media in the city of Sydney don't quite know what to do with him because he's winsome and kind, and he's prayerful, and he's generous-hearted. And he's clear, but there's something about him that's good. I think he's a good public figure. To your first question, and then I might get back to that. When I wrote Being the Bad Guys, I thought the next 20 years is going to be hard. There's a tide coming back. There's a definite switch. And I almost feel like that book is becoming redundant in terms of its sense of where it might all go. The Quiet Revival is a report out by the Bible Society in the UK, and pre-COVID, 2018, 4% of 18 to 24-year-old males were going to church once a month. That's gone to 21%.
Wow.
That's not just turning up to church. That's Bible and the church and the spiritual disciplines. Something's happening. Now, I don't think it's all Christianity. People say the tide of faith is coming back in. I say it's more like the spiritual tsunami, because everyone's into tarot and Wicca and witchcraft and witch talk and all these sorts of things because they're looking for something more. No one's becoming a new atheist. Those ideas are done. They're the dinosaurs, right? I think there's something new happening in the West, and it's a bit like the prophets of Baal. You can see the cloud is like the size of a man's fist, but it hasn't rained yet, but it's gonna. I feel that something might change, and that's. I'm not a prophet, nor the son of a prophet, and I work for a non-profit organisation, but I do see something like that. That's exciting. And conversations and baptisms all over the place, I think. That's my take. But other Christian leaders, I think politically, I know Andrew Hastie quite well, and I think I'll watch this space over the next 10 years that he may end up being the opposition leader at some stage. Wouldn't take it now. That's a poison chalice. He's a well thought out, intellectually heavyweight Christian in the public square. But it's the low hanging fruit, low grade, everyday Christian that I think's actually the key to it. They get to know their networks of Christian friends and relationships, and I think that's something in that. And the everyday pastor who just is normal and just goes to his coffee shop and talks to people. Hey, you're in Melbourne. There's enough of those coffee shops. You know what I mean?
So it's so good to hear you, talk about hope. What
Yeah.
is your hope for the church, if Christ doesn't come back? What is your hope for the church as we continue to do the things we do?
I'd say this as well. Benedict XVI, previous pope to the one who just died, said, "Pruned it grows." I think we've had a bit of a pruning,
Right.
and there's been a deconstruction among many. What's happening? You're seeing these people deconstruct their faith, looking for, my wife is a clinician, and she said, you'll see these Christians going in the opposite direction because they want to live their own life. And you see all these other people come into the clinic there must be something more to life than just my, my sexual conquests, my job, and my car. And they're passing like ships in the night. And I think you're going to see a reemergence of young people coming, but with no framework. And church is going to have to look a little different. And Tim Keller said in his last book before he died, Forgive, you're going to have to disciple people who have no framework about forgiveness, who've grown up in a cancel culture, that forgiveness is absolutely essential. And that's what that book by Jonathan Rauch, Cross Purposes, talks about as well. If America can't do public forgiveness, it's in trouble. So I think forgiveness is at the center of it. I'll go back to Tim Keller. His last article for the Atlantic Journal before he died was American Christianity is due for a revival. That was very prescient 2.5 years ago. And suddenly it seems to be coming. Maybe not US, yes, but definitely UK, Australia, other Western nations. And here's what he said. Christianity doesn't go from strength to strength. It goes from death to resurrection.
Mm.
So someone will never become a Christian until they do, all right? And I remember a woman I met who became a Christian who was white, Western, well-educated woman working in the creative industries. And I said, people like you don't become Christian. But she did.
And this is not so much a question, but I can't help but comment on what you've just said about this sense of people coming towards Christianity, but without the framework. I would put that in the sense of with such low biblical knowledge and education, but they are truly coming to know Jesus. We're even seeing that in our own, Q Baptist Church. But we're actually seeing that, and these are highly educated, highly intelligent, particularly young men.
Yeah.
What we're reading and what we're seeing is we're actually experiencing that, living that. I mean, you and I have talked about that, and it's quite extraordinary. How do we, as a church, how do we posture ourselves in that environment?
I would say a couple of things. You've got to have such a great grasp of the gospel that you are not affronted by how much of a wreck their lives is.
Yeah.
If you're shocked, you don't have a healthy theology of sin. Right?
In fact, we're revolving all the way back to the start of your story, where you talked about, when your dad left, the shame, and you found a place where there was grace and where there was acceptance.
And that's what I remember my mum saying it to me after she went to this other Pentecostal church. She looked around the room and saw kind of misfits, young, single, pregnant women, all these. And she goes, these aren't my people. And she goes, oh, actually, they are.
Mm.
I'm about to be divorced woman in the 80s, which in our circles was frowned upon, even if you weren't at fault, I think. And she said, oh, no, these are my people. And I think that's the thing. I don't think young people coming into church today want to see glossy. They want to see real. And you've got to walk alongside them. And for young men in particular, find some older blokes who'll just hang out with them and model what it looks like to not be addicted to porn, to love a woman for all of your life and have kids together and a job and look after people and honor those you don't agree with and all those sorts of things that they don't have because they don't have parents who stay together or whatever, So I think it's not rocket science. It's going to be living in community well. I also think the church could dial down its number of activities and create some white space in its program for just people spending time together. Because, when someone becomes a Christian, they just want to hang out. They just want to spend, and I reckon more meals around the Bible that are casual, the better. And whether, the older man or older woman, it's the older women and the older men in our churches that are actually going to do this work, because if they've got a bit of wisdom and love for Jesus, they'll see these young people come in and they'll just go, come and have dinner or coffee, and look, the Bible said something about this here, and we can just talk about that. And I think that's going to be an integral part of it. Yes, platform preaching is super important, but I think they're the rocks in the jar, but you've got to fill it with this other sand, I think.
So you were talking a bit about before. So you wrote all these books, they blew up. Your blogs have become really popular. But I guess like a big thing that we focus on in this podcast is it actually doesn't stop after that event. So I guess like what we like to ask our guests is, how is God currently working in your life, Stephen? And what has he been revealing to you lately?
That's a really good question. A couple of things. You can't exchange, or you can't fill in the lack of character with gifting. And this is something we talk about all the time, that the call of my life is not to present blogs and books to the public, because one day I'll stand before Jesus to give account for my life. That's sobering as I get older. And the other thing I would say is, there are some lessons that just keep coming back to have to be learned because I haven't learned them deep enough. And one of them is forgiveness. I've got a couple of situations of I struggle to forgive something that happened. I'm going, how can I be nearly 60 and this still be a presenting issue in my life? Why does it feel like there's so much more dross to burn off me? And I'd want to say, as someone who's nearly 60, that I still have a very strong sense of how we're supposed to live godly lives. But when I look at how rough people's lives are, I just go, yeah, I get it. Jordan Peterson, live long enough, you'll suffer. That's true, right? And live long enough and people will go through some terrible situations and they'll be broken. And there's a great picture that someone took. When he goes to baseball matches in the US, he takes photos of the home run where someone's been hit by the ball and they get to walk the bases and it's the winning pitch, a winning home run, and everyone's cheering at the end as this guy hobbles in. And he does it. He said, that's heaven. That's how you're going to get to heaven. It's not going to be, I hit a homer. It's going to be, we're all going to hobble in to cheers. And I like that.
That's wonderful, mate. Fantastic.
Yeah, so good. And, this has been such a awesome opportunity talking to you, Stephen. And I guess for those listening, how do they hear more about your blogs or from your, like sermons or speeches or what books do you have out, and how do they find your content?
The humbly named StephenMcAlpine.com website. I've been doing some work in collating everything, and someone kindly put together a very good website. So StephenMcAlpine.com will have blogs. People can write to me on that as well. I'd love to start something like Nick Cave has, the Red Hand Files, where people just write in like a spiritual agony aunt. I might start that. So I do that. And, I've got it on Instagram. I'm on the usual socials, but I struggle with them because I'm a Northern Irish working class person enough to know that self-promotion isn't something we used to do growing up. It was seen as you don't promote yourself or anything. And so I've always struggled with that. But StephenMcAlpine.com will get people in touch with me. And I've got podcasts on that as well.
Nice. Any new books coming out anytime soon?
Well, I was supposed to have written one, but we moved to Sydney from Perth and life got busy. But I have my editor is still on my case, and I've got 4 days at a beach house on the south coast of Sydney in 2 weeks' time to write the draft. That sounds awful, doesn't it? And I'm calling it A Secular Age. There's A Secular Age by Charles Taylor, big book, and the sexuality one, it's not about sex. It's about identity and how that has become the core value, the personal identity issue, and how the operating system of Christianity is very different to that operating system. They're Mac and Windows, but the gospel can speak into it and how to do that. So it's a bit of how do you speak into the framework of these young people coming across your path who have totally different views of the world and what human flourishing means to us. And I want to give people sort of a bit of a charts and maps how to do that.
We really appreciate your time, mate. No doubt you and I will catch up soon, but it's been a really rich time, and this will be coming out soon. Thanks so much for your time, mate. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate speaking to you guys and love seeing what's happening at Kew Baptist.
God bless, mate.
Thank you. The Audience of One podcast is hosted by Pastor Mark Edwards and Regan Smith and is produced by the Kew Baptist Church. This episode is recorded and edited by the great Rob Hanlon.